Today's story is unsolved and perhaps one of the most bizarre to ever happen in Nebraska. Because for all intents and purposes, a tall, well-built 19-year-old boy should be able to walk somewhere on his own in the middle of the day. There shouldn't be any risks. So how is it that he can vanish in broad daylight in the middle of a residential with no witnesses? How can a smart boy with a bright future and no enemies possibly find himself at the mercy of something sinister? Now, before we go into the story, I'm OriKat and welcome to our channel. I deliver cases to you in a dramatisation format, so if that's something you enjoy, you'll be happy to know we upload once a week. As always, my aim is to give a voice to the victims and remember them as they were. So with that, let's begin. On the 24th of June, 1981, in Grand Island, Nebraska, Jason, sometimes known as JJ, was born to Jim and Kelly Jolkowski. He had one younger brother called Michael. Now, Grand Island was a very nice city. It had all this vast grassland around it and was known to be a real retail hub of Nebraska, with lots of shopping and dining opportunities. So Jason was a very shy boy growing up, and he had a handful of friends. And by the time he was reaching the end of his teenage years, he had really grown into a gentle giant, standing at around 6'1". He was naturally introverted, but it didn't stop him from being friendly, caring, and close to his family. He had some learning disabilities relating to speech and language. You could tell it by talking to him. But regardless, Jason was known to be very intelligent. This was especially demonstrated by the way he talked about sport. Because Jason absolutely loved sport, and he was very athletic. He was an avid fan who was literally a walking dictionary of sporting trivia. He could tell you pretty much anything you wanted to know. His favourite baseball team was the Chicago Cubs, and his favourite football team was the Denver Broncos. At some point, he and his family moved to Omaha, Nebraska, where they were situated in the Benson neighbourhood, on the 48th and Benford Avenue. Jason even attended and graduated from the high school nearby. Now, Omaha in particular had a lot of cultural diversity and charm. Many people described it as vibrant, forever growing and changing. Unfortunately, like anywhere, rapid population growth eventually led to increasing racial and ethnic tensions. But overall, it was generally a safe area to live. Benson neighbourhood, where Jason and his family resided, was meant to be known as a more historical part of Omaha. It contained a lot of Omaha's past history. And it wasn't really somewhere parents would keep their kids indoors and tell them, you can't go out there, it's not safe. But around 2001, which was when the Jolkowskis were there, drug use was definitely growing in the area, and there had even been a few expulsions at the local high school. Of course, Jason, being the sweet, family-orientated teenager he wasn't really involved in that type of scene. He didn't do drugs, and he really didn't have that much interest in alcohol. Instead, a lot of his time after graduating high school was spent planning his future, and when he wasn't doing that, he was helping out his parents with chores around the house, and worked shifts at an Italian-American restaurant, Fazoli's, located on 80th and Cass Street. So naturally, when Jason brought up one day that he was enrolled part-time in a radio broadcasting program, his parents were quite surprised. That hadn't seemed like something they thought he would have chosen to do on his own. But regardless, it was already set in stone. He was doing the program at Iowa Western Community College in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Council Bluffs was on the eastern bank of the Missouri River. It was right across from Omaha, so it was pretty local to get to. And boy, was Jason really enjoying the programming. He soon found the broadcasting to be a passion for him, and really came alive when he was doing it. Like, he was so enthusiastic and confident that when you were listening to him, you would instantly forget that he was this quiet, introverted boy. So when he was on the radio, he really was in his element, and he had developed a following even. Because of this, his aspiration was to become a radio DJ at KIWR, which was basically a radio broadcasting channel in an alternative format. And by the time June came around, he was really excited to be soon starting a job at an actual radio station. On the 12th of June 2001, he and his family ate dinner all together like they usually would. And this was really a time for them to bond. They would usually play silly games at the dinner table to make each other laugh. For example, someone could say the most random word they could think of and the others would try not to smile. Jason pretty much lost every time. Afterwards, on a more serious note, their parents told the boys that they would be working tomorrow, and that even though it was summer break, there were still chores to be done. Notably, they wanted the trash cans pulled in. So they all went to bed. Jeff and Kelly went to work early the next day, and Jason and Michael had the house all to themselves. The boys had breakfast together like usual. Not even 10 a.m. yet, Jason was already flitting around doing chores. I mean, if he got them done now, he would have some free time afterwards before he had to go to his work shift. Unfortunately, his boss had other plans. He called Jason up on the phone and Jason answered, surprised over who he was speaking to. Anyway, Jason's boss told him that they were expecting to be busy that night, which meant that he wanted Jason to come in a bit earlier to help with the workload. And Jason wasn't a slacker by any means, but it was really early for his boss to want him to come in, and it was just something he didn't fancy doing. I mean, his car was still in the repair shop due to a hailstorm earlier that week, and no one really fancies walking 4 miles. But Jason was a polite boy. He didn't want to say no, and he really did like his work. So he said he supposed he could walk to work. But after further discussion with his boss, they decided it would be a lot easier if one of Jason's co-workers came and picked him up. So his boss asked for house directions, but that was something Jason struggled with. Though extremely high functioning, there were some things he found difficult due to his learning disabilities. Giving directions to his home was one of them. Eventually, Jason and his boss decided that it would just be best if one of Jason's female co-workers picked him up, so they planned that it would be outside his high school on Maple Street. Going to the high school wasn't too far of a walk for Jason. He'd done the route many times, and his female co-worker had also gone to that school. Happy with this arrangement, Jason said he would get there for 11 a.m. Coming off the phone, he told his brother all this and changed into the appropriate clothes to make his way to the meeting place. It was 27 degrees that Wednesday, so it was nice and warm, the sun was bright, but it still was a little bit breezy. Jason settled on wearing his white Chicago Cubs shirt, a bluish-black Chicago Cubs hat, black dress pants, and black dress shoes. He decided he would carry his red work t-shirt and change into it when he got to Fazoli's. Now, because Jason was very punctual and he was very considerate of people's feelings, not to mention his female co-worker was coming all the way out there, he really wanted to be as easy as possible. Therefore, he planned to leave a little bit earlier, just to make sure he wouldn't be late. Remembering that he had to do the trash cans before he left, Jason got his brother Michael, and they both went outside. And so at 10:45, cutting it fine before Jason had to leave for work, the boys pulled the trash cans off the street and into the garage. One of their neighbours watched them do this and even said hello to the boys when they noticed him. Chores done for the day, Jason collected his red work t-shirt, $60, and said goodbye to Michael. Michael was fine to stay at home alone. It didn't really matter to him. So Jason set on his way to the high school, which was only 8 blocks away. Michael watched him go until he was out of sight, and then the younger of the Jolkowski brothers went back inside to enjoy his summer. Around 20 to 30 minutes later, when Michael was just relaxing, he heard the phone ring again. And Michael thought it was strange to have yet another call in the morning, but he dutifully went over and answered it. On the other end of the phone was Jason's co-worker, and she sounded annoyed at first. She was asking where Jason was and why he wasn't at the meeting place. Michael, hearing how frustrated she sounded, took the opportunity to mess with her a little. He pretended that he was Jason on the phone and that he hadn't left the house yet. But amongst that prevailing annoyance in the co-worker's voice, Michael soon started to catch on that she did actually sound pretty concerned. So he paused and he told her that he was Michael, Jason's younger brother, and that was she sure that Jason hadn't made it there, because he literally just saw him leave the house in that direction. And whilst they were on the phone, another 10-ish minutes went past and there was still no sign of Jason. Really worried it had been too long, the female co-worker ended the call with Michael. Before she rang off, she told Michael not to worry and that she would go back, phone their boss and see if he could sort this out. And so that's what she did. And at this point, when the news got back to Jason's boss, knowing that Jason wasn't someone who stood up others, Jason's boss immediately got in contact with his parents. Now, for them to get a phone call midday on a Wednesday was strange enough, but their confusion soon turned into absolute horror when they realised that their sweet son was unaccounted for. So they rushed back home, practically interrogated Michael, who said what he had seen. He said Jason went to work early and there was no further contact. Jim and Kelly were out of their minds with worry and fear, because it just wasn't like Jason to freak this many people out and not get in contact with anyone. And they couldn't get a hold of him on his phone, so they didn't know what else to do. Unfortunately, like many families in America, the Jolkowskis were misinformed about filing a missing persons case, and the police didn't really bother to correct people. Jason's parents believed they had to wait 24 hours before they could contact anybody, and that was 24 hours of valuable time the Jolkowskis wished they hadn't wasted. Now, at first, the police didn't really treat Jason's disappearance as serious. They kind of reasoned with Jason's parents that the boy was 19. If he wanted to, he was entitled to take a few days to himself. And on top of this, the police even suggested to Jason's parents, have they ever considered the possibility that Jason could be a runaway? Jim and Kelly were naturally aghast at this suggestion because Jason had been happy. He hadn't had any personal problems they were aware of. He talked about his future prospects all the time. Life was good. He had absolutely no reason to run away. Unbelievably, it actually took the police 9 days to get their act together and start working on the case. They started with a ground search and interviewed the neighbours, but found it particularly pertinent to distinguish if Jason had ever made it to the high school at all. So when they looked at the security footage, which basically covered between the elementary school to the high school, they realised Jason hadn't even made it that far. So he had to have disappeared along that big stretch of road he walked on. And as the days ticked by, there was nothing on Jason's end to presume that he had run away. The $650 in his bank account hadn't been touched, he hadn't cashed in any paychecks, he hadn't used his cell phone, and he didn't even take his car out of the shop. And this silence was quickly getting Jim and Kelly to fear the worst. The police weren't coming up with any leads at all. They checked out the female co-worker and the boss at Fazoli's, but they both checked out. The police talked to the neighbours, who didn't know anything, except that one neighbour that corroborated Michael's perspective of Jason leaving. The police even went as far as to identify sex offenders in the area. And whilst there were a considerable number, there was only really one close by on Bedford Avenue. The police did check that specific house, and once again that person was cleared, and the police were back where they started with nothing. So really, it was as if Jason had vanished in the middle of broad daylight. No one had seen or heard a thing, and if they had, they definitely weren't telling. Jason's family suspected foul play was involved, but the police really couldn't do anything. They had no evidence to follow and no breakthroughs in the case. And the lead police officer on the case even said himself it was the most baffling one he had ever come across in his 30 years of experience. Unfortunately, Jason's case went cold, but that didn't stop Jason's family from hoping that one day they would get the answers they desired. Not to mention, there was all the possible theories that circulated over the years. A hit and run was considered. Perhaps Jason had been struck by a car. Perhaps the driver panicked and tried to dispose of his body. But there are a lot of holes in this theory, because someone would have had to have seen. Granted, not many people are about on a Wednesday workday, but someone would have seen a driver lugging a 6'1" body into their car. It would have been noticeable, and it would have been a struggle. Not to mention, there was no tyre tracks, nor was there any blood on the road. And altercations with vehicles usually created quite a lot of noise. But no one in the area came forth about any accidents happening within the time frame Jason went missing. The second theory was that Jason got into someone's car. Because in some ways you could see this happening. Not too many cars go past, but there certainly are some. Now Jason, because of his introverted personality, likely wouldn't have got into a car with a complete stranger. But if it had been someone he'd known, he might think, what's the harm? It would shorten his walk to the high school. But then when I think about this more, depending on how far up the road he got, was it really worth getting another ride? He would be getting in another car, just to get out straight away again. And because Jason left early, he clearly thought he was going to make it on time, and that he clearly expected to be there at exactly 11 a.m. If he got there too early by taking a lift, he would just be left waiting around, which didn't make much sense either. Also, in the event he did get in someone's car, he would likely be getting into the passenger seat. And because, as I've said, Jason's very tall and very strong, he would have been really hard to overpower, especially whilst driving. I don't think the theories of him having an accident, being a runaway, or being suicidal are particularly credible either. There wasn't really any hazards to warrant Jason having an accident. There was no bodies of water or densely wooded areas on his route. Not to mention, if he had hurt himself in the middle of the street, someone would have come across him eventually. And as for being suicidal or a runaway, none of these really fitted in with Jason's personality. As I said, he was happy and positive for the future, and he was devout to his religion. His parents thought that because of his personal beliefs, he wouldn't turn to suicide anyway. And plus, he disappeared in the middle of a residential area. Where would he be able to hide himself so well that no one, not even the police, could find him? We also have to remember Jason left the house with $60 that day. You wouldn't really be able to run away or get very far on that. And he likely would have used the other $650 in his bank account. Plus, I don't think he'd hurt his family in this way, considering the close relationship he had with them. The last theory was that he was invited into someone's house. It likely would have been a crime of opportunity. And to me personally, this feels like the most feasible explanation, especially given what we know about Jason. Now, Jason was really polite, and on a normal day, if it meant making him run late, he probably wouldn't make such a detour as to enter someone else's residence. But Jason did leave early with time to spare. So if someone had asked him, perhaps to help them carry something inside, he may have thought he had a bit of extra time to do so, which is a much better alternative than point-blank refusing someone. I mean, from Jason's point of view, if he didn't feel that confident social-wise, it would likely be very hard to say no to someone. And we have to remember, whether Jason had his car or not that day, he had done the route many times. Because he'd gone to the local high school, people would have seen him routinely using that route and would likely recognise who he was. I think someone on that road, from his house to however far he made it to the high school, sensed an opportunity. And hypothetically, we really don't know how much rapport this person could have built up with Jason over time. I mean, saying hi to someone is pretty innocuous, but say you were to do that every day for a year, perhaps indulging in small talk now and then, you might start to feel you know that person enough to help them if they required assistance. But all in all, it just goes to show we really don't know who's living amongst us or what insidious desires they may be sitting on. In the aftermath of Jason's disappearance, his family successfully campaigned for Jason's Law, which is a statewide database for missing people in Nebraska, founded in 2005. Kelly Jolkowski, the brave woman she was, went on to receive a Volunteer for Victims Award from the US Attorney General Eric Holder in 2010. And then 4 years later, in 2014, she received the Nebraska's Governor's Points of Lights Award in recognition of her work to support the families of missing persons. So all in all, we can see Jason's admirable qualities came from his parents. And as of 2024, Omaha police are still investigating this case. We all know someone out there knows something. And it would give Jason's family so much closure if there was finally some light shed on his fate. If anyone knows anything, you are urged to call the Omaha Police Department at 402-444-5657. Do you think the police acted fast enough? Comment yes or no down below.